usually peaceful Occupy movement taking a violent turn on the campus of UC Berkeley. Riot police were called in yesterday to disband the Occupy tent city, but students linked arms, refusing to abandon the site. The video shows the cops beating protesters with batons. In all, 39 people were arrested. Our next guest, Nomi Prins, is a frequent visitor to Occupy LA. She's also a senior fellow at the Demos think tank and author of the new book, Black Tuesday. She's also today's specialist. And Nomi, what is your perspective on the dynamic of the energy of the occupation? In other words, it's clear that the occupation represents this sort of frustrated resistance to the obvious breach of fairness that is manifesting everywhere if you open your eyes and look out your door. What is your sense of where it's headed, and what is your sense of those who say Los Angeles really is the place to go for the winter to drive this message for a long list of reasons, not the least of which the lovely weather we can see behind you? I'm not sure if that's fake or not, but it looks better than what we get here in New York. So,
well, yeah, full transparency, that this actually is fake, but it is generally nice out here. And you know, also the way that the Occupy LA movement has been growing, there's a good portion of grassy lawn in front of City Hall in downtown LA, and that allows you to sort of have these encampments and create a more staying situation. And that's been why I think people are looking at LA as potentially being a good place for the winter. So you have not just that weather, you have a much more comfortable place to operate and to remain. And although there have been some discussions from the mayor and so forth saying that the grass isn't being watered properly and all sorts of things that are starting to rumble about potentially moving people, so far that hasn't happened yet, and people are aware of it and you know, ready to do something about it in terms of making sure that that's not a reason to disoccupy.
And then I'll release you to the panel in 1 second, but what is your perspective on the cohesiveness and the solidarity that binds basically every occupation, and quite honestly everybody who would support the occupation, whether it's you, me, Bill Black, or anybody else, in the actual parks themselves, which consist of a wide variety of behaviors that I certainly wouldn't necessarily stand in solidarity with, and I suspect you might not either. But it seems that there's a very big distinction between a given park or area's culture and the actual principles that the occupation represents globally.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general principles are very consistent. It's like there were trillions of dollars thrown at subsidizing a fraudulent system that's basically pillaging the population, and we're coming to that head. And you know, particularly students who are involved, and you saw the horrific scenes from UC Berkeley are you know, leading that in many ways, and there is a strong youth component here in LA. I was the one in Wall Street a couple weeks ago, so that's consistent. But also there's multitude of age groups, there's multitude of diversities, and more people are actually coming out to, at least the ones I've been looking at, these groups, because they need somewhere to pour not just the outrage that's evident, but also this feeling that, you know, we need to do something, and what needs to be done is not coming from the political infrastructure. I mean, you just saw the debates. That was just, you know, shameful, and it needs to come from the ground up, and I think that's why it's continuing to grow, and a lot more people are looking into it, watching the media reports, and actually engaging themselves that might not have engaged themselves before.
Karen?
You know, hey, Nomi, one of the things that strikes me is to what you were just saying is, you know, you've got kind of the Occupy Wall Street and a lot of critics from the right in particular, you know, all these kids in their tents hanging out, but then also the 99%, which really I think is your neighbors, your friends. I mean, those are ordinary Americans that look and sound like people we all know, who, as you said, it's not just anger, but I think also frustration and just saying, look, this is a visible symbol that the system isn't working. And I'm wondering sort of what the mood is there in Los Angeles in terms of how those two things are intertwined between 99% and the Occupy Wall Street.
Well, I think people in LA are more and more thinking of themselves as that extension of Wall Street. There isn't a strong banking contingent, for example, physically in downtown LA, but just recently there was an Occupy Bank of America's front lobby, and you know, so there is that idea of joining that voice from Wall Street and throughout, as we've seen globally. And again, it's not just youth. They might be the ones who are spending more time physically there at night, but you know, it's teachers, it's off-duty cops, it's firemen whose stations have been deleted because of budget cuts, because the tax money that should have been coming here isn't, because a lot of the companies aren't paying it, not at the federal, not at the state level. So in that respect, LA and New York and the Occupy movements in general are very, very similar. You do have distinctions. There's more of a Hispanic contingent here. A lot of the signs and some of the chants are in Spanish and in English, and that's some of the color of LA. But the general message and the general spirit that is coming to these movements is really similar from the ones I've been at.
Jimmy.
So, Nomi, I'd like to kind of put this in perspective for just a second and ask you two very easy, quick questions. First, how many people in Occupy Berkeley were arrested?
It was 39, I believe, that were arrested.
And they were arrested because they were protesting not having jobs. How many people at Penn State and College Station were arrested last night at those protests, and they were protesting someone losing their job because he turned a blind eye to child molestation?
Exactly. The numbers do not even, they don't make sense. We're arresting and protesting in those cases from the police and the outside infrastructure, the wrong people. At Berkeley and students throughout the country, they're not just protesting, joblessness. They're protesting the fact that in California, for example, tuition has increased by 25% this year. Nothing else has increased in terms of wages, job prospects, anything by 25% this year. Health insurance possibly has gotten near that amount, but we're talking like significant extractions of cash from students that are already facing $24,000 on average of debt when they leave these schools, and they have every right to be there and protesting. And the issue of being arrested wasn't even just because they were there. It's because they were allowed to be there, but they were not allowed to camp there. In other words, if they stood up all night and didn't pitch tents, apparently that would have been okay. But the fact that they wanted to make themselves, viably there for overnight messages, that was the problem. And that's why you get the riot police out.
Susan.
Hi, Naomi. You touched on something that you didn't have a very big financial industry where you are, but you do have a very large entertainment industry, and those people really are the real 1%. Those are the people who are making $10 million a movie, etc. We don't seem to see any anger against those 1%, and I'm just curious on your take on that, because again, if it's about fairness, you're seeing these people make tens or hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and there's certainly a lot of anger here about Kim Kardashian, for example, is one of that 1%, and her issues. So there is that. There's a strong, growing Occupy Kim Kardashian movement here. But no, I think that there's less anger because with the exception of Kim Kardashian, kind of the vulgarity of showing it. They weren't, you can decide to pay to see a movie or not. You can get some entertainment value from getting it on demand.
Everyone's angry at, and I just find it a little hypocritical. They're not angry at those people who are the 1%, and you probably see, like in New York, in a city like Los Angeles, you see
that's
the low end and the high.
One at a time, Susan. Go ahead.
Okay, but Nomi, I'm going to step in here for 1 second. I don't see this movement, though, as it's not just about we're angry at the 1%. This is not class warfare. This is saying 99% of Americans, the system is failing, and the 1% are not, many in the 1% are not acknowledging their responsibility to be a part of the solution. They just want more tax.
I've run out of time. I do agree, though, that it's not a function of rich versus poor. It's a function of rigged and manipulated wealth accumulation.
That's exactly
which is why Kim Kardashian may be seen as a manipulator of fame for money, whereas I don't know, Steve Martin might be seen as a really funny guy who makes movies. There are bankers who are seen as, or investors who are seen as really good investors, and then there are other people like the big banks that are seen as riggers and extractors. And I think that the distinction, as I see it, is are you making it or are you taking it? Anyway, Nomi, a pleasure. Talk to you soon. At least even the fake weather in LA looks good.
Thank you.
Jimmy, Karen, and Susan will...